It is my pleasure to welcome you to the second part of the crash course Foundations of Quantitative Research. Even though this course is about quantitative research, this part is about qualitative research. The reason being that every good researcher, empirical researcher, should understand both quantitative and qualitative research. Qualitative research, you need a basic understanding at least, so that you know what the other part of empirical research is doing, what can be done there, what cannot be done there. This will also give you better understanding what you can do in quantitative research and what you can't do in quantitative research. What I'm about to tell you about qualitative research is based on the book Qualitative Research for Dummies, but unfortunately it is the German version. Since a few years now, I'm based in Germany, and the publisher asked me to write the German book. They did not ask me to write the English version, unfortunately, but perhaps they will come up at some point. However, I will see that in the foreseeable future, or not in the too distant future, I will get a few more qualitative research papers out, and perhaps this can give you further understanding. Here, I would like to give you an idea what the qualitative research approach is, what is at the core of collecting qualitative data, and what is at the core of analyzing and interpreting qualitative data. Let's start with the qualitative research approach. If you have watched the first lecture of this series, of this crash course, you might have already a very good idea what qualitative research is about. As I was explaining there, the philosophical foundations of qualitative and quantitative research. The objective, the epistemic goal of qualitative research is to comprehensively examine the experiences of people with regard to their individual world, to specific situation or context therein. We're doing this to discover and explain their thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Their specific thoughts, emotions, and behaviors in specific contexts. On this basis, we would like to develop generalizable theories or models so that we have possibility of how to explain the specific life worlds of people better. One can see four core principles in qualitative research. The first is we want to comprehensively understand subjective phenomena. That means we focus rather on the research subjects, our participants, than on the research objects. For instance, we're not in qualitative research, we're not so much interested in how strong is the work satisfaction or the organizational commitment. We would be interested or could be interested in qualitative research in how do people understand organizational commitment? How do they feel about work satisfaction? But we're looking at the subjects because we want to describe, explain, and understand the subjective reality, the subjective world of people, meaning our research subjects. And to do this, to describe, explain, understand the subjective reality world of people, we should ideally analyze, so examine, collect data for, and then analyze all details of this subjective world of the people to gain a comprehensive understanding of them. When doing this, we need to be open. We would like to develop theories out of the life worlds of people, and there, within developing these theories, we need to have the utmost openness. That means we have open research questions. We ask why, how, to what end. We never ask if, like yes or no questions. The same through data collection, in an interview, in a group discussion. We ask open questions, and these interviews or group discussions, whatever method you're applying, data collection method, shows a low degree of standardization. When conducting qualitative research, what is of the essence is flexibility. We need related to openness, we need to be flexible, and it's a circular process. And that applies to both data collection and the analysis. In data collection, your participants might come up with aspects you did not think of beforehand. And you can't ignore these aspects, but you need to integrate them into your research. In the analysis, it will be the odd one out when you analyze your data and you have one run through and that's it. You will, in a circular way, go back, redefine categories, findings, restructure them, and so forth. So flexibility and circularity. As I said before, it's a circular process. In quantitative research, you have a rather linear process. You can work through and you're golden. Qualitative research, this will not work. It is a circular process, especially during the analysis. So in quantitative research, we would like to minimize the contact between researcher and participants. That is hardly possible in qualitative research. If you have a qualitative interview, you are in direct interaction with your participants. So we're gaining our knowledge through such interactions. And then we should see the relationship between us as researchers and the participants as a cooperation to gain knowledge. Important is that the prerogative of interpreting how the world looks lies with the participant. The participant tells us how he or she sees the world. And that means, as a researcher, our only task is to gain information and understand the subjective reality of participants. We're not going in any discussion. We're not trying to convince the participant of anything. We only want to gain information. Let me give you an example of a qualitative research project that, from my point of view, makes sense. I probably have to say this, as this is a project I've conducted with a colleague. It is about subjective decision-making and reasoning in moral dilemma situations. My colleague and I were coming from the primal academic dilemma, if you will, the trolley dilemma. And this dilemma, train or trolley goes down the tracks and is out of control. If nothing happens, the trolley will run down the tracks and kill 5 workers on the track. But imagine you are on a lever, you can pull the lever. Then the runaway trolley will be redirected to side tracks and the 5 workers are saved, but 1 worker on the sidetrack, he will be killed. So there is a dilemma. There's not 100% good solution. In the realms of philosophy and psychology, there are lots of thoughts and research about this. In psychology, predominantly quantitative research. And philosophers or psychologists said, when pulling the lever, saving the 5 workers, that is a utilitarian decision. Maximizing the utility for the maximum number of people. Saving the 5, killing the 1. Not pulling the lever, so the runaway trolley goes straight and kills the 5 workers, is called a deontological decision. And in deontological decisions, one focuses on rules, general rules, and the individual rights and duties. My colleague and I quite some time back now, we're sitting outside a pub and thought, wait a moment, we don't believe that people think in such terms. Because I have a utilitarian mindset, this is why I pulled the lever. Oh, my deontological soul does not allow me to pull the lever. No, people don't think this way. And I can tell you the interviews confirmed that people are not thinking in this way. So we ask ourselves, what is actually in the subjective world of people behind such decisions? So our objectives were to find out the subjective reasons and the reasoning for and against a moral dilemma decision. There's a moral dilemma, so there will be inner conflicts. Second objective is, how do people deal with such inner conflicts when they're making such a decision in such a moral dilemma situation? Finally, how do people apply utilitarian or deontological decision making in their real lives? That will be an example for a qualitative research project. Let's go to the next step, the collection of qualitative data. And here I want to contrast qualitative data collection, here the sample and qualitative research, with the quantitative understanding of a sample. In quantitative research, not always, but quite often, you're looking for statistical representativeness. So, when is something representative? It is when the distribution of attributes in the sample that you gather the data from matches the distribution of attributes in the population at a high confidence level with a low margin of error. An example, when you want to have a representative sample, is when you look at polling. So what candidate would you vote for if we had a general election today? Then we want to have a sample that represents the electorate. But here a caveat, not all academic research is looking for statistical representativity. For this, we need a large sample size, a few hundred, normally more than 1,000 participants. And there are more sampling methods, but you might have probability or random sampling. That means every element of the population has the same probability to be drawn into the sample. Qualitative research, on the other hand, we want to develop theories and we want to look at all the details of the subjective lives of people. We will never in a million years have a sample that is representative of any population. You will simply not be able to conduct thousands of qualitative interviews or group discussions. Quantitative researchers speak of content representativeness. That means we might have a small sample, but we can comprehensively explain and understand a phenomenon in its width and depth so that we can develop a theory on this basis. And it's in the nature of qualitative research. It's a small sample size. I'll give you an example in a moment for sampling. And in qualitative research, you will never, or virtually never, have random sampling. You have conscious sampling. That means you select your participants following a certain purpose. We want to have, in qualitative research, we want to have participants who can substantially contribute to gaining knowledge and understanding. So we consciously choose whom we select for our interviews, for group discussions, or other methods of data collection. To give you an example, I will use again the moral dilemma article. So we had a sampling plan and we had 18 participants. We had 9 participants who made a utilitarian decision, pulling the lever, and 9 participants making a deontological decision, not pulling the lever. And we used 3 dilemmata, switch, loop, food bridge. There's slight variations to each. Earlier I only exemplified the project using the switch dilemma. And then we balanced out male and female participants. Now, what forms of data collection do you have? Of course, you have qualitative interviews. There's several forms. Probably the most common one is a semi-structured interview. Group discussions, written questionnaires, observations, secondary data, and so on. I will look a bit deeper, or in a bit more detail. I will look at semi-structured interviews, as this is, as I said, the most common form of data collection method. But of course, there are more. Very important here. Normally, such interviews must be recorded. At least it must be an audio recording. And this audio recording must be transcribed so that you have a literal transcription of your interviews. Let's go to the semi-structured interview. Which is based on an interview guideline. And this interview guideline has mainly open questions. The interview guideline is just a guideline. It's not a questionnaire that you go through step by step, question by question. It should just help you to keep an overview. What content did you cover in the interview, so that everything is covered in sufficient depth and width. In this guideline, the order of questions and their formulations are not so important. They must be used flexibly, and they must be adjusted to the individual participants and their view on the world. So, for instance, you ask the second question of your guideline, and your participant gives you an answer to your 6th question. You cannot say, oh, wait a moment, that comes later. No, then you have to deal with the content that you assumed will come under your 6th question. Of course, this participant sees his world connected between question 2 and 6. Furthermore, the formulation of questions, there doesn't need to be strictly fixed and always the same way. It doesn't matter if I ask, how are you feeling? Or can you tell me how your feelings are? It doesn't matter. It depends on the flow of the conversation and how your participants see the world. The starting point, of course, is the examined phenomenon, even though we're more interested in the view of our participants. But we need a starting point, and that is where the interview is circled or built around. The precondition is then, of course, that you have a research object that can be clearly defined, but is not examined in depth. If you can develop a theory or a model with sufficient depth or width from literature, then qualitative research and interviews do not make sense. So you must be able to define the research object, but there should not be a very detailed and very broad model already existing. Then it does not make sense. Coming to the role of the participants and the epistemic goal of semi-structured interviews. We want to find out how the participants view their world. So that is the core of our qualitative interviews. The participants are at the heart of this. To be precise, the participants and their view of the world. So we want to explain and understand the motives, attitudes, psychological processes, and behaviors of people in specific circumstances. And to come to this goal, our participants must be capable of verbalizing their thoughts and feelings, and they must be willing to share their thoughts and feelings. If you go to very intimate content in research projects, not everyone would like to share this with a stranger. And that is a hard part, or that is a challenge, a hurdle that you have in qualitative interviews. Let me give you an example of an interview guideline. And again, from the Moral Dilemma project. So we had 4 main phases: welcome and warm-up phase. Then it was about the reasons for and against the decision, the public explanation of this decision, and then generalized decision making in the real world. So as a warm-up and welcome, we presented the stimulus again. That is our dilemma, and we ask again, what decision would you take? Would you pull the lever or not? Then it is already with this research object, it is already a hardcore question, but in comparison, the soft one to warm up. How do you feel when dealing with the dilemma and making a decision, just in general? And then it was the questions, the main parts to get to answers that will help us to answer our research questions, to reach our research objectives. So we asked, in this case, it is a person who made a utilitarian decision. Why did you decide to intervene so that the 5 workers survived and the 1 worker died? We also asked, why didn't you go for the other option? Then it was inner conflicts. When you're making such a decision, you face a dilemma, and there are reasons for one or the other decision. How do you deal with such a dilemma? We went a step further. In the 3rd section, we are asked, now imagine you have to explain your decision in a public interview. What would you say there? We even went another step further. Now imagine you have to explain your decision to the bereaved of the worker who died. What would you do there? The 4th part was about generalizing. How do people apply utilitarian and deontological decisions in their normal lives? So we explained you made a utilitarian decision, which is, defined this, and said in which situations in normal life would you use such a decision-making type, and why would you do this? We ask the same for deontological decisions, and then finally we ask, in real life, such situations and such decision-making can cause inner conflicts. How do you deal with these conflicts? This was an overview of how to collect qualitative data. Now it is how to analyze qualitative data. And I've developed a method that consists of 4 phases and 9 steps. You have preparatory steps, and you're coding and developing your coding category system. Out of this, you develop a model or a theory, and then how to report your results in a research paper. So first, you should define the analytic frame. And this is on the basis of your theory, your research questions, and your interview guideline. You need to know, what is my objective, what is my framework. Based on this, you decide on the transcription of your interview recordings. Is a very extensive, detailed transcription, or is it a rather simple one? The actual analysis, if you will, you firstly should have an overview, get a solid understanding of what is generally going on in my interviews. Then you derive the deductive categories from theory, research questions, and your interview guideline. Deductive categories are categories that you can, before you actually read the interviews, you can derive from theory, from literature. I will show you examples in a moment. And then you apply your deductive categories and you come to your inductive categories, which you form out of your interviews, reading your transcripts, and then you assign a meaning, which is a code or a category, to a sentence, a half sentence, a word, and so forth. With regard to your model development, you look at the context of the categories. In which context did a person say or do something? And based on your category system, which you developed in the second phase, and the context, you derive a theoretical model, which will be the core of your findings. And then you report the categories and your model in your research paper. Now, what is a category that I was talking about? You can also have coding and developing categories. You have in your transcripts your words, statements, sentences, and so on. And these have to be coded. And coding is assigning a code or a category to these words, statements, and sentences. And there you have deductive and inductive categories. Here's an example how you can define such categories or codes in qualitative research papers. Again, from the Moral Dilemma project, we have, when dealing with inner conflicts, the category hoping for understanding and forgiveness. As the definition of the category, participants state that against the backdrop of his or her perceived guilt, he or she hopes that others and all the bereaved can understand or even forgive his or her decision. An example from the transcribed interviews is, naturally, the forgiveness and understanding of the bereaved is important to me. This category we inductively found and developed. Now, deductive and inductive categories. Here is an excerpt of our overall hierarchical category system. We have some deductive categories that we can deduce from our research questions. Our objective was, what are the reasons for and against utilitarian and deontological decisions? So, a major main category is reasons for utilitarian decisions. Another main category is reasons for deontological decisions. These are deductive categories. They're clear before we started the analysis. All the rest are inductive categories. Out of our interviews, out of transcripts, we discovered that reasons for utilitarian decisions may be based in the situation and so therefore are situation or decision related reasons. There may be based on values a person has, and they may be based on the belief in God or fate. Similar categories we could find out for reasons for deontological decisions, plus another category which is the de-involvement because of indifference toward people. Finally, what should be the overall result of a qualitative research paper? With a few exceptions, it should be a model that you develop. And here I show you the principal model that my colleague and I developed for the Moral Dilemma project. So in the center, we have the decision in that situation. And we could find two paths. Someone believes in God or fate. Because of this, he or she has certain values. And because of the belief, the faith, and the values, it comes to an extensive decision, a lot of thinking, or an automated decision, like common sense, gut feeling, and that is then a utilitarian or a deontological decision. But there's the other direction. First comes the decision, goes in the direction like, I do what is best for me, and then in hindsight, I find a justification or vindication for this. And then in hindsight, I look for through which values or through fate or God, how can I justify, vindicate my decision? I said earlier, there might be things that you never expected. They come in and you can't ignore them. This also happened to my colleague and I. The participants, and quite a lot, virtually all of them, said, I need to know more about these workers on the tracks. So additional factors came in. What value do these people have? Are they good people? Are they bad people? Are they criminals? And how long do they have to live? And so on. And they said, it's a completely different story if there's my father, my beloved partner, or a friend. Then I would decide completely differently. So the emotional relationship was of relevance. The bottom half of the model is then dealing with inner conflicts. So the decision is made, and then the first step is questioning the decision and the situation by rationalizing the decision or by emphasizing on intuition like gut feeling, common sense. And then it leads to accepting responsibility and guilt or relativizing responsibility and guilt. Who can expect from me to do something? I'm an innocent bystander. Or even externalizing responsibility and guilt and saying, what are these workers doing there? It's their own fault. So these are the different paths. And to such a model, perhaps not as complex, as far as I've mentioned, it goes further than this in the article, but it's not as complex, but such a model you want to develop through qualitative research, with only a few exceptions. Now, I hope I could give you a good idea, a basic understanding of qualitative research. The next lecture will be about the quality criteria of quantitative research. Until then, I wish you all the best, and it is bye-bye for now.